Next up, we have our Building Solid Foundations for Change panel. This is the studios and facilities. We're going to dive in with this Building Solid Foundations for Change with the moderator, Katharine Pavoni, and she's the Deputy Director of Provincial Film Commission Creative BC. And then please welcome our amazing panelists, Gemma Martini, Chief Executive Producer, Martini Film Studios, Pete Mitchell, President of Vancouver Film Studios, and Steve Reed, Head of Studio and Executive Producer of Versatile Media.
So I believe everyone's already done their homework and spent some time on the SPF website and probably know a bit about the bios of my wonderful guests here today. So I think instead of doing a big intro, we'll just kick it off with your name, your title, and what does sustainability mean to you as a human, just to set the stage, first of all. I'll start with you, Gemma.
Good morning, Gemma Martini, CEO of Martini Film Studios and Executive Producer, Lighthouse Pictures. What does sustainability mean to me? For me, sustainability is really making efforts in the right direction and trying to make change on an ongoing basis.
Amazing. Pete?
Hello, Pete Mitchell, Vancouver Film Studios. Sustainability to me, I'm going to answer in a more corporate way, which is we just try to have it at the core of what we do. Every decision we make should take into account what the sustainability interaction and consequences are.
Amazing.
Stephen Reed, Versatile Media, Executive Producer. I would say be accountable and be better would be the two driving forces on sustainability for our company.
Amazing. A quick question for the audience before we get started, just so we know where the conversation lies here. Can I see a set of hands up for anyone who knows what virtual production is or has been on a virtual production stage? Clock on that, Steve? Quick hands up if you've ever been in a film sound stage before. Anyone been to VFS? Anyone been to Martini? Which one's better? No, I'm just kidding. That was a joke. That was a joke. Well done. That's really helpful for us because we know there's a lot of people who've been here before, some familiar faces on the stage, and we just want to make sure that the conversation we have today is impactful and you learn something and take something out of it. We thought we might kick off with a few visuals that were kindly provided by Steve, just to dive a little bit more into virtual production. So I think most people in the audience are aware. Something that's kind of new on the scene, Steve, is virtual production design. So I just want to pass the mic over to you and walk us through a bit of the images you have today.
Sure. What I put together is a little video that's going to enable me to be a bit lazy and try and explain virtual production. It's there's a lot going on, so I figured the best way to do this is really take you through the life of a virtual production stage from beginning to sort of filming. So the video we're about to see is an easy way, hopefully, for those who weren't aware, get a little bit of the behind the scenes and the journey that goes on. And then at the end, I have a video that sort of talks about the next leap that we've been able to achieve as a studio in terms of the visual quality, which is going to really open up the future opportunities to do more with virtual production as sort of filming continues on its journey. So if you could skip to the next slide, that'd be great. Thank you. So this is what we call our virtual art department, or VAD is the term that the industry has sort of landed on. These are fully CG environments that's now incorporated with the set. We build small sets and position them inside and align them, and then utilize the LED and blend between the physical set. Here's our sort of actors on this test shoot we did. Here's examples of you can see from sort of shooting through camera and how we integrate on a shot-by-shot level the physical sets, which are much smaller and less materials, that then marry and blend with the physical. And then this is our sort of latest technology of being able to incorporate some more complicated environments. In this position here, you're looking at an urban sort of environment or a very natural-looking environment. And just with a simple test, no lighting, just a camera and a couple of actors, we're able to really bring those locations to your soundstage. And by doing so, as an apples for apples comparison of going to a location and film, like this would be utilizing about 1% of the carbon footprint. So it's a huge factor when we look at sustainability as we move forward. Thank you.
Amazing. I think everyone here in the audience knows, virtual production is a great solution for some productions, but I think in general, we do continue to need the sound stages where we build our sets, especially when we have a big show that we want to stay here for years and years and years and use for several seasons. I know some of you might be familiar with what's been going on at VFS and Martini. Maybe give us sort of your top 3 newest initiatives or programs, just as a quick oversight, what you're doing at Martini in the built space, specifically on the stage.
Thank you. I feel like Pete is the kingpin in this conversation, but I'll start.
That's why I started with you, Gemma.
Yeah, exactly. So when we took over the buildings and changed them to sound stages, we changed out to use renewable natural gas. So we have 0 carbon footprint in terms of the heating source. We have solar panels on one of our buildings that building is now net zero. And there's new incentives now, so we might eventually do the other 2 as well. And of course we have the EV chargers, and we provide, I feel like it's our obligation to provide the best opportunity for production coming to our lot to be able to achieve their own sustainability goals. So we try to provide that canvas for them.
Amazing. Pete, do you have anything to add about what's new at VFS?
The only thing I would start with is to say that we really appreciate Gemma's efforts and the work she's done, because it actually pushes us.
Right.
And we appreciate people doing that. In addition to some of those things that Gemma's adopted, we've just finished a LEEDs gold building and offices, stage and offices. So that was probably our biggest, most recent advance, but we're also a B Corp, and we've been carbon neutral since 2008.
Can you tell us a tiny bit about what goes into the LEEDs certification? Like what kind of retrofitting do you need to do on a soundstage to get that?
Yeah, so this is a new build, not retro, and really there's 2 components, which is the build and the operation. And so the build is materials and build techniques, which reduce the carbon footprint. Concrete is an incredible source of carbon emissions. So it's built with more ash in it than a conventional building. And then in the operation, there's a monitoring process, and our operations team make sure that we still live up to the LEEDs gold standard of operating, which is, again, going to reduce the carbon footprint.
You were going to jump in there, Gemma.
You have a green roof too, don't you?
We have a green roof.
I thought that was cool. You should mention
we have
that.
a green
And you
roof.
got bees.
And we have bees. We got a lot of
Goodness
things.
sakes.
Yeah, so.
Talk about the bees, Pete.
Yeah.
Talk about the bees.
Bees are incredible. We have 2 beehives. They produce 50 pounds of honey a year. It's amazing. And they're on the lots. And, some people appreciate them, and other people, when we tell them that there's beehives there, near our community gardens, which we also have, they're like, oh, could you move those? That was one of the comments we got. So no, we can't. You can keep your trucks away. So yeah, we have bees as well.
Amazing.
Yeah, that is amazing, actually. I didn't know that, and that's fantastic to hear.
You're going to get bees at Versatile now. See, this is the whole conversation. Every time someone gets something new, everyone jumps on board, and we're all helping each other make ourselves better, right?
But what's great is that by this afternoon, he can have virtual bees. Right?
No one will ask to
Yeah,
be
they
moved.
probably won't give the same level of sustainability as the real ones, though, I think. But actually, I'm learning a lot from these guys. I mean, these are pioneered the industry here in sort of Vancouver. My facility is pretty new. We've only been open 6 months. So, I look to these guys and really, as they lead the path and try and sort of help them on that journey for sure with sustainability. But bees is a whole new level. I never even considered this.
I think there's an elephant in the room here, which is that the more successful you are, eventually the need for us will disappear, right? And I think that it's something the industry has to actually really address, because it also means a lowering in employment, right? And a change of employment from people who are banging nails to people who are programming computers. So it's...
I think there's some truth to that, I think, leading up to where we are today. I do sort of feel that LED volumes are going to become more mobile as the future of virtual production starts to get adopted by more people. I feel sound stages like yourselves will definitely be having, if you haven't already had LED volumes loaded in there, built and constructed. We have a permanent setting as well as now looking at how we can build mobile volumes. And it's not sustainable for me to look at every single stage. I've now got to find a location. I mean, the hardest part of putting an LED volume together is finding the place that you can build it. You guys have stages. So I think as that sort of moves ahead, and I think when I look at the sets that I have that are shooting on our traditional stage or whether they're shooting on our virtual production stage, we still carry the same number of headcounts that go through. In fact, if anything, on the volume, there's more. Whether that trend continues, I think AI is going to have a big role in. But I don't think the writing is on the wall for you guys. I think the industry will adapt and our technology will be the strongest level of adapting to look at how we can move and operate on your facilities.
And I feel like Zaya kind of set us up perfectly for this panel when we were talking about building these sets, the amazing craftspeople who actually do this work within the sound stages or even on a virtual set, right? You showed us exactly, there's still people there building them. Can we talk a little bit about sort of the circularity piece to this all? So I think you'd mentioned that previously you've gotten sets into the stage and then constructed them there for the purpose of meeting a specific budget level, for example.
Absolutely, yeah. In fact, the studio that's in our, the production that's in our studio today, through the production designers knowing each other and how that community of departments works together, we were able to pull in sets that were being wrapped at alternative locations and shipping partial elements of them over that also help the production. It's a medium to low level sort of production budget of around 10 million to shoot the entire film for a production budget. So it was cost effectively decided that if that opportunity is there, we should lead that way. And I do believe Gemma's also had a lot of sort of groundwork done in this part of the business too. Production designers being able to share sets after they've been constructed. I think the challenge is those teams then repurposing them in a way where it doesn't feel like it's a reuse of those traditional sets. But yeah, we're seeing that. And even with the new productions coming in, where they come and give a tour, immediately the first questions they ask is, what are you doing with your set pieces when you're finished? Can we buy them off the current set if we roll straight in onto another production?
I'm glad people are asking that question. That means a lot. Do you want to speak a little bit to the rescue program you've been doing as well, Gemma?
Yeah, and kudos to Kelsey at Rio Green. I'm sure she's here today. She really started the conversation around this. So thank you so much in terms of the sustainable lockup, et cetera. So that was, I think, the seed that was planted and the opportunity was there for everybody to take advantage of. And so now here we are this many years later, and what's fantastic is when a production is finishing and they don't have the use of a set anymore and they know it's one that would be used again. We have a Boeing 767 that came from debris. We have a hospital set from The Good Doctor who 3 different productions took parts of their hospital because it was massive. And then we also have a courthouse that came from So Help Me Todd and a diner that came from Riverdale. So we feel so fortunate to have these massive sets that are now there and can be reused over and over again.
And this information is on your website, correct? I mean, I was browsing your website last week after our introductory course.
Me?
Kind
We're
of.
all best friends now.
And it was great to see. I mean, that makes it as easy as it can be for any production to find. Because I think the easier you make that, the more people will adopt it.
Yeah, and further to that, like when a production leaves, we often will say, well, can you leave that behind? Because we have opportunity to reuse the flats for something else, right? So it's really a fantastic program that I really love, and I really love that the productions now are more open to the conversation. At one time, it was all about, well, it's kind of trademarked, and I'm not really sure, but now they're much more open to that.
Yeah.
And I guess we talked about this a little bit when you were talking about you want to provide the opportunities for people to make the right decisions. So as a stage owner, Pete, you're like, you can shoot in this, you've got solar on the roof, you've got access to renewable diesel for your productions as well. How are you finding, like, the will is there, right? People want to make the right decision. How do we as an industry continue to make people choose the right thing to do when they're there? Because you talk a little bit, Pete, I think you do something like a pre-production meeting with the client when they arrive. How's that going for you?
Yeah, so the good news is that for certain offerings that we have, we've seen progress. So, for example, the first, if you come to Vancouver Film Studios and you want to shoot, you have to go through a pre-production sustainability meeting with our crew and the green representative and hopefully management on the other side. So that has progressed in the last 4 years maybe, from literally blank stares on the other side of the table and people just doing other things and emailing during the meeting to real engagement. And I think our next step is actually exit interviews of those people to see how, you know, the intention at the beginning worked through to the end. But, you know, it does give me optimism that even though it seems like it's moving at a glacial speed, it is happening. And another example is our EV stations, which we put in 5 or 6 years ago, and they sat there unused for 3-4 years. And it was heartbreaking and lots of discussions about who should be able to park there or not. And now they're overwhelmed. So, you know, we need to add more. We've got 16 and we've got to keep going. So even though it seems like it's going slowly, there is change, and that gives me optimism. I have yet to encounter a production/producer who decided to come to our facility over another one because of our sustainability initiatives. And that would be really heartwarming if it happened, but at the end of the day, we're going to keep doing it, and eventually, I think it's the same thing. Eventually, this very slow curve is going to go exponential, and everybody is going to be required to be setting a sustainable table for producers when they come in, or they will be just not in the discussion.
Right, and we talked about that decision-making process. So someone's coming to BC. Are they coming to BC because we have the most sustainable jurisdiction in the world, because we have the best stages? How do we make sure that they're aware of that? And I think something we want the influencers to be involved, right? And so you look at someone who signs a green rider. Benedict Cumberbatch just in the news. Gemma's going to call him and tell him about Martini Studios.
It's not the only reason I want to call him.
Like, if we get those influencers, those leaders to make those kinds of decisions, but we also have to elevate what we're doing here, right, as a jurisdiction, and how do we do that? How do we spread the messaging around it? I think those pre-pro meetings are important, for sure. You said a little bit about exit strategy. So this is what we were talking about a little bit, onboarding of the crew and then offboarding. What does that look like? So you get the end of your show, you're tired, you're burnt out, you're out of money. Are you really going to take that set apart piece by piece? How do you think you as a studio owner could maybe help guide them in the right direction?
We try and start the conversations early in terms of the set piece, the set rescue piece. We do try, if we know that there's a set out there that is attractive to the productions to use over and over, we'll reach out to the producer. Once we hear that the production is perhaps in their last season, we'll call them up and say, hey, do you have something that we could reuse? And so we have to start the conversation really early. It takes a long time.
And they say, have you heard something about us being in our last season?
I make sure it's posted in the news first, because that would be really awkward.
Everyone's face falls in the conversation. You're like, uh-oh, that was wrong.
I'm always the
timing.
last to know anyway, so it's all good.
So in terms of those exit meetings, what we would like to do eventually is, as they happen, hand the production a report that tells them what their carbon footprint is. And so the data is a really important part of this, and we have the ability, for the most part, to collect the vast majority of it, as do they, but they don't tend to want to, or who knows where that information goes. So
That's really interesting, though, because, I mean, health and safety is one of those things that's mandated on sets. Every morning they come in, here's the health and safety meeting, this is where we've got to meet at these locations, and so on and so forth. So mandating it in your studio, I think, is really interesting. Then giving them the information on how well they did is really gives them no excuse to not be better as a client, as a producer, as people in this industry, which is one of the more polluting industries, in the world right now. And so I think the fact that you're mandating that at your facility is kudos to you. I think it's amazing.
Well, it's amazing because Sam Montgomery and Natasha Dixon, who do those meetings, are sitting in the back. So if you have any questions about it, you can ask them.
So reporting. obviously it's important. I think that's the piece, right? If you're getting asked for that information, you're giving it to them. What about those productions who aren't doing that? And what about the things that aren't tick boxes? Like, what about the things that are above and beyond, like if you're talking about renewable natural gas or their actual use of solar? How do we expand on that? And maybe like Steve, in your business, maybe there's a way to share the news at the end of a production of sort of what they managed to save by being in maybe 10 locations and you're only actually in one. How can we like big up the work that they're doing, even if they don't know they're doing it?
Yeah, look, I think it's really interesting and something I'm trying to find a pathway for I mean, I haven't taken the steps that you know, my friends here have done. As a new studio, I think everyone knows getting something off the ground is not easy, and we're in the very early stages of that. But seeing it, it's inspiring to see some of the ideas that are coming to the table on this. And I think I've got to do a lot of learning still in terms of where I'm at. By nature, virtual production is very green, and I think it's there not because it wasn't the green sort of element that drove virtual production. It was the ability to do more with less money, I think, is the driving force behind virtual production at the moment. But I think sustainability, we're very lucky that it comes along with it. And so I've inherited some good news as a business that I've invested heavily in. But you know, there's still more work to do, for sure.
Can you speak a little bit, Steve? So something that we keep hearing about is the use of the LED screens and how much actual power they take to power them, and the fact that they're not necessarily being used to the amount of power that they think they need. Has there been any conversation around that in your sort of business model on how to limit?
Yeah, it's been a lot. I mean, even just getting power into our building to turn the volume on was a very stressful process that took 9 months longer than I felt it should have done. But I think as the productions come through, the challenge for me right now is more on an educational level. It's like production designers, DPs, directors, co-creatives, filmmakers, they're learning this technology. And I think the more that they get exposure to it, the better we will be as an organization moving forward in terms of sustainability. The power that the volume uses at full power takes about 1 megawatt of power to drive a volume. But you reach that level of sort of usage on a traditional stage very quickly with light rigs and cameras and anything else that requires electricity. So it's almost an apples for apples comparison at that level. And what you've got to remember is what the LED volume does. It gives you an image in the background, but it also lights your foreground element. You still need other traditional lights, but at a less so. And our electrical bill is probably higher than one of your stages, I'm guessing. I don't know that, but I would guess it would be.
Yeah, sorry, but the capacity on our average 15,000 square foot stage is 3.5 megawatts.
Right, yeah. So we have 2 stages at 44,000 square feet, and we're using 1.7 megawatts in the building. We have a 3 megawatt substation, but we just can't get that power into it at the moment from BC Hydro. But it's comparable, I think.
Shout out to our partners at BC Hydro. For all the hard work they've done over the last couple of years.
They've made a lot of money off all of us.
So, I mean, you've worked so hard on these initiatives and these programs. Sometimes you can write them into policy, right? You can suggest it. But ultimately, the people who are coming in to use these stages, they're clients, right? And so you can't necessarily force their hand. You can influence, you can work. What would you say are some of like the actual barriers or challenges? Like, what are people doing that's very naughty that you feel like you can't control anymore? Like anti-idling, anything that you're setting them up for success and they're not quite hitting the mark. Where are the challenges?
Can I take, I'll give you 2. So one is idling. It's so difficult to stop idling, and part of the reason is because in the winter months, the people who drive trucks aren't given offices or a warm place to go, so they sit in their trucks, they get cold, they turn the trucks on. There are alternate ways of doing that with electric heaters and so on, but for whatever reason, they don't really there's not a lot of uptake there. So that's tremendously frustrating. But the other frustration is someone who gives a producer $80 million and 9 months to make a series. Go, right? And there's no prep, there's a lot of prep called development, but you don't bring in that line producer until you've got the green lights, because you don't want to spend any money, and then as soon as you do, the pressure's on and it's go, 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 and all the studio and streamer policy about sustainability and all the good intent of the crew and everybody from top to bottom kind of goes out the window. Not for every show, but a lot of shows, just because of the time pressures. And you'd think that on the 5th year of a series that situation wouldn't exist, but somehow they managed to create it because of the way things are picked up and so on. So that's the big frustration. Everybody just needs to slow down, and they need to take like a structural, systemic look at production. And I think, you know, the streamers are trying to do it, but they haven't got to that point yet where they're looking across their system. And accountability. So if you're a Jenny op, and there's this unbelievable story happening right now where a show in town, which is not the show that everybody's going to think of, it's a different one, wants 31 generators for a location. It's unbelievable. It's 10,000 liters of diesel fuel a day, and it's 22,000 kilos or pounds of carbon per day to do that. It's nuts, right? But part of the problem is the person ordering all those Jennies isn't accountable for the amount of fuel they use. The accounting department doesn't go over and say, hey, you know, you're blowing the budget like crazy. It's just those streams are two different things, right? Cost of Jenny, cost of fuel, and someone's got to bring those together at the end and say, hey, we could have, you know, done anything else to avoid that.
Different line items, so they're not putting 2 and 2 together, and usually those costs are being added up at the end, and we're like, oh darn, we could have had, you know, we could have built something and not had to use that. Are you finding any sort of misbehaviors on your lot, or what's your hardest conversation to have?
I think the hardest part is different beliefs in terms of, let's call it sustainability in this particular case. It's a very passionate topic for everyone, and everyone has their own idea of what being sustainable is. So what we do at Martini is, like I said, we kind of, I loved your thing, you set the table. So we're at setting the table for sustainability. When you come, you have no option but to use all these sustainable options because production's busy. There's a zillion things going on. They don't have the opportunity to come and say, hey, have you ever considered? And so we provide that table for them. So in terms of Lighthouse Productions, MOW company, budgets are minuscule, as you're all familiar. And renewable diesel now, because of the carbon tax, renewable diesel is actually cheaper than conventional diesel. And so we started to do that. And I was shocked at what an uphill battle it was to convince the drivers and the head of the transport that renewable diesel was the way we were going to go. And unfortunately, it got to the point where I provided the educational opportunity, I provided all the information, and there's still, the beliefs were still that it was gonna congeal in the tanks, they need more trucks and more trailers, and it just wasn't gonna work out. And I finally, unfortunately, had to put my foot down and say, this is not an option, so whatever we can do, and so again, training, education, bring in the specialty guy, et cetera. So I realized that electrification and electric generators is much better way to go. There's not enough of them in town, but they're evolving, which is amazing. But in the meantime, I feel like there's something. This is all a journey, right? So we can all make incremental steps to make it better. So fighting through those beliefs, in some cases myths, that people have about certain sustainable practices, I think is the hardest part of what we do.
Myth busting, story of our lives. We're like, I heard something about, yeah, we know. Okay, we're gonna kind of get close to the end here, probably wrap it up and open the floor to questions. Before we do, I guess when it comes to sort of building the foundations, setting the table, influencing in that good way, Zaya brought up something very interesting about rewarding good behavior, right? The carrot and stick conversation, as always. How do we elevate the people who are doing the right thing and bring them up into the spotlight and say, this is how you do this? Any thoughts on how you could even do that at a studio level?
I was going to say it's a great question. I don't have an answer.
I knew I was going to stump you at some point, Pete.
Part of it is because it's hard from our perspective to tell whether show A or B is being more responsible. We don't see what happens on location. We used to see what happens when they brought their their waste back to the studio. It was unbelievable, the bags of single-use plastic bottles that they used to bring back to the studio for recycling. That's gone, so that's great. But I do think the positive reinforcement strategy is a good one, and it's a good point. We should do that.
I think for us, we're involved creatively on most of the productions that come in. Not all of them, but a lot of the productions that come to our facility. We're creatively involved, creating environments and backgrounds that are going on the volume, and then supporting them within the studio. As a kind of little mandate, the show we have in at the moment, it's been there for 3 months, and I've actually changed our policy on how we even sell the facility these days. You know, we used to sort of book a daily rate for this tech and a daily rate for a stage and these sort of elements. What we've been doing recently is sort of saying, well, just block book the entire studio, take it over, utilize as many days as you need on volume, as many days as you don't. When we sort of started that prep, we were about, I think, a week away from principal photography, and we were literally down to, I think we originally bid about 30% of the movie on volume, but through the prep process and just how uncertain different production units were with this technology, we came down to close to about 5%, which is pretty worrying for me as an individual and the facility. The first day of principal photography was on volume, and immediately on wrap that evening, the producers called meetings, pulled everyone together, and we now have over 60% of the production filming on the volume. So that's 60% better sustainable for that particular production. So, and it's also helped reduce costs from going out on a location shoot. So the incentive, I think, are there naturally in what I do as a business. It's the educational component I've got to get to. How do we get this in the hands of the people that are making those decisions and plan for it? Because I agree with what you said too. It's that planning process. If it's not planned for, then it becomes a rush. When it becomes a rush, everything else is out the window other than getting the image.
So as always, educate, engage, you know, rise up, make sure that people understand that it's the right thing to do. Does anyone have any questions for the audience for my wonderful panelists today? If not, you can just stand up and say, what is your... We're also looking for sustainability jokes. If anyone has any sustainability jokes, Pete worked on his for like maybe an hour. It wasn't very good. Right up front here. This better be a sustainability joke, Andrew.
Sorry, not joke, but thanks for an amazing and informative panel to all of you. My question is actually for Stephen. I think it's amazing what the decarbonization opportunities that virtual productions offer us. But as we're going more and more into scope 3 emissions, like the embodied emissions of the materials that we're using, I'm wondering if you can shed any kind of light of where we can get some more information on how to understand the life cycle impacts of the LCD screens and that are used in virtual production, because that's something that I'm finding really hard to find.
Yeah, I mean, the manufacturers is probably going to be the first place I would go in a decision on the panels that we've developed. And we actually were part of the development of the panels. We didn't just sort of purchase them off shelf. We were actually working with the manufacturer and R&D'ing a panel that was sort of suitable for filming or better for filming on compared to just buying something off a shelf. We're expecting at least 5 years out of the panels that we've developed. Now, you know, some of them came to an early conclusion when a liter of coffee was thrown over our ceiling from above, and we lost about 30 chassis, which would include about 90 separate panels. So that came at a huge loss, and you know, insurance replaced it, no problem. But yeah, I would say the manufacturers are the key elements to be able to provide that information. But I would expect at least 5 years out of an LED panel.
Was there another question in the back there?
Yeah, I've got one here. I'm just curious as to what the discussions that kind of, for all three of you, you're having with productions as to the vendors or their products that they're bringing onto the lot that aren't necessarily like affiliated with your services.
So we have we call it a newsletter, but it doesn't get published very often. We just update it. that we give to productions that basically highlight vendors that we think are more sustainable. And then there's certain vendors that are not allowed on our lot as well from previous practices.
Wow.
I like that. The VFS blacklist.
Yeah, I don't have necessarily a list yet, but I think that's an excellent idea. Thanks, Pete. But also I know that Real Green has a list of green vendors that I would likely direct them to in the future. I love that. I'm really following, so we've been focusing a lot on the renewable diesel because it's right down the street from us and it's, energy is one of our larger consumers. But I also love the technology of that cardboard set building. I'm kind of following that to see how that evolves as well, because I think that's a fascinating next step in terms of presenting that to production as an option.
Real Green, green vendor list. Shout out Real Green, green vendor list. Was there another question back there?
Thanks. It's a question for Stephen and also an after question for the three of you. Stephen, what are your plans for including sustainability like solar roofs or bees or green roofs on your studio and bringing chargers to your studio? And for Gemma and Pete and Steve, would you, talking about what you just said, Gemma, following up on alternative materials and cardboard, have you thought about mycelium for constructing sets? Thank you.
I've actually just received a quote for solar to cover our entire ceiling, which fortunately is flat, with solar panels. And I'm actually currently looking at the government rebates for businesses to install that. If that goes ahead, it would be a significant upfront investment for us as a studio, but I think the benefits moving forward, I mean, it would give me more power in the building, if nothing else, and at least sustainable power. So we're already at the position of getting quotes. I'm just trying to work out whether it's financially viable for me to do it. When it comes to the set constructions, honestly, our role, if we're involved, is more at a digital level. And so it's just a conversation on, can this be done digitally? And if it is, then that would be the approach that we would suggest.
Any thoughts on that, Peter, Gemma? About the new material piece?
Yeah, I actually don't know that material that you're talking about there. So
Mycelium.
Oh, I think there's fascinating. There's so much for me to learn. I don't know much about it, as I would have to, of course, learn about it myself and then try and educate and work through those myths and beliefs that we talked about with production. So I have to say that I'm grateful for our whole film community educating production at every level, like those green battery workshops. Until those happened in the last couple of years, there was a fear around electric energy. So I feel like the same thing in terms of construction materials, that kind of needs to happen. I believe that IATSE is doing some training on that, because until there's a buy-in from the people on the floor, so to speak, I cannot provide them with options that are then they're going to want to use.
If that's all right, I have your email address. I can send you information about it.
Sure.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point. So when all of the things we go back to what they'll be talking about this afternoon at the collective workforce training, if people don't know how to use it or what to use, they're not going to. And so, from a stage level, you're not necessarily out there every day, but I know all of you work really hard to share information as much as possible, and Real Green will continue to do so as well. Any other questions from the crowd? Oh. Got a mic up here?
Oh, here we go.
Thank you.
Hello. How many studio heads does it take to screw in a light bulb? None, because they were replaced by energy-efficient LEDs.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just made that one up. Thank you.
I mean, I know no one's going to want to ask a serious question after that, but do you?
Do you guys have the ability to offer incentives for, I don't know, things like different ways of building sets, that sort of thing, in your riders when studios rent, when productions rent at your studios?
Do we have the ability? Yes. but it's very difficult to dictate to people who have been using the same methodology for 25, 30 years to change overnight. So I agree, it's all about education, and it's got to be led from production, not from us, otherwise it'd just be a pushback.
Or I think rebates. I mean, everyone chooses where to film, and a big part of that decision is down to what rebates are open to them in those territories. And I feel there is a conversation to be had about whether there's some kind of multiplier that can go against the rebate of, being able to secure a higher or the max rebate by being sustainable in your work practices would be a good start for Creative BC and for the industry as a whole, I think, in Canada.
So just on that one, it's something we haven't really covered here, but I think that there's certification soup going on out there, and that's the problem, is that nobody can land on one standard that would then allow, whether it's an incentive program or a studio, to give some kind of rebate or incentive to do it. So that's something we have to address.
Certification soup is our new favorite buzzword, so thanks for bringing that up, Pete. Any last questions? Otherwise, I'm going to wrap it up. I know everyone's desperate for another coffee, bio break. Anything else?
Katharine, you asked for a joke.
We got one. Oh, Pete's got one too. Never mind. Stand by.
All right, who's seen Spinal Tap?
Yeah.
Everybody's seen Spinal Tap. Let me get it straight. So what did the virtual rockumentary producer say just before they rolled camera? Turn the volume up to 11.
Thank you to my panelists. You guys were wonderful, and thanks for having us today.
Thank you.